Well, Dylan, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm spectacular. How are you, Mark?
Well, I am spectacular too. I don't usually use that term. I'm a little bit more subdued as a Navy SEAL, but I like that. So we'll go with that. Spectacular. So where are you right now? Where do you live?
I just moved to Austin, Texas a year ago after 10 years in Manhattan. So
Ooh,
Texan now.
what a
Yeehaw.
change. Yeehaw.
Yeah.
Are you roping yet?
I got my first pair of cowboy boots, so I'm
Did
on
you?
the way. Yeah, I think next is the hat or the gun, and I'm trying to figure out the order of operations there because we were shooting the guns in the
I
air. I want to
think
make
you
sure
need a hat in order to shoot a gun properly in
hat.
Texas.
But then when you're shooting up in the air and saying yeehaw, what do you do about the holes in the hat that it's the gun's going to cause? What's
Well, that's one of the first lessons is how not to blow your hat off your head. So yeah, let me know when you master that. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to have moved down to Austin. It's not the weather, it's something else, right? Taxes maybe, or the
it's
environment, the community, the entrepreneurial community. What is it for you?
It's the energy.
The energy?
I love New York. It's an intellectual and cultural mecca. People
Yeah.
come from all over the world to do the biggest, baddest things that they can there.
Yeah.
And I think it's still an incredible city. But I think Austin is that city of the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Uh-huh.
I have friends moving from San Francisco, New York, LA every like few weeks or a month.
No kidding.
Um, and the biggest driver for my wife, who's actually our head of engineering at the company I work at, um, we moved down to Austin to build like a co-living community. So
Yeah.
try to live as like, tribal close as we could to as many friends as possible. And so we picked a neighborhood here right outside the city in Austin. We've got like 8 to 10 families who've already moved in, more coming
Okay.
all the time. Try to build a little bit more of a community style living.
So what does that look like to you that would be different than, say, what you experience in Manhattan, this co-living idea? You share
Uh,
resources for education, for things like that, or what does it look like?
Yeah, I think child care and education are two of the big ones.
Yep.
So one is having sort of open door policies where both people and kids are able to sort of come in and out of each other's homes and
Nice.
have a little bit more of intermingling. Two is strong desire not to send children to call it legacy school
Indoctrination
systems.
school, you mean?
Totally. I mean, a lot of our education system was like ported over from Prussia, right? And
Right.
so it's maladapted to today's world. It's taught to
True.
help people stay in line, be on time, shut up, do what you're told, and gives people, sort of a reduces curiosity and lateral thinking.
Yeah,
Today,
it's conformist. It tuck
totally.
everybody in to be a good little citizen. Right.
I mean, we're like innately tool makers, right? We're
Right.
curious as primates, and somehow school seems to beat the curiosity out of people.
Right.
Like it's almost like designed to make you not want to learn. It's fascinating.
I know, it's genius, isn't it? Oh, that's pretty interesting. So co-living, I like that. It's not like a commune where you're
It's an anti-commune
cohabitating.
commune.
It's an
Anti-commune
anti-commune.
commune.
Right, right. You're still capitalist, right, at
Yeah.
heart, or whatever. You probably wouldn't use that term to describe what you're doing, but I love that this age we're in where we get to redefine, some age-old stuck ideas. Like what does it mean to live together socially in a spirit of harmony, sharing resources? Well, that doesn't have to look like communism or socialism. It's co-living, right? We can all be, still really adhere to the ideas of advancing our own creative and entrepreneurial pursuits, but share things that are worth sharing, right? I love that. And the gift
Yeah.
economy and the sharing economy allow us to do that now. Technology has really flattened the playing field for everybody.
There's a quote I like from this thinker and writer I follow, Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Yeah, I know
If you're
Nicholas
familiar.
Taleb. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's like with my family, I want to be communist. With
Oh, I've
my
heard that.
friend,
Yeah,
with my friends, I want to be socialist.
right.
With my like state, I want to be federalist, and with my
Right.
country, I want to be
A
anarchist.
republic.
Something I'm paraphrasing. Yeah,
Yeah, libertarian, I think, at the federal level. Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. One size doesn't fit all for different size communities, and I think that's another lesson that's been lost a little bit. Fascinating. Well, I know we got a ton to talk about. Give us a sense of your background. What were the formative forces that shaped you as a young guy, and your parents, how do they shape you, your peers, school, what made you who you are today as a human? Pretty broad-based question, so you can go wherever you want with that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think growing up, I was consistently told that I came from a bit of an anomalous background.
Okay.
I grew up in a working class family in Southern California, in Anaheim, California, or as
Sure.
we called it, Anacrime.
Anaheim. Yeah. Well,
About
that's where
7
Disney World is, or Disneyland, right?
Well, one of the benefits of living in Anaheim is we were like a 10-minute walk from Disneyland.
Right.
So could see the fireworks every single night, which had its pluses and minuses. You couldn't
Right.
go to bed before 8 or 9 p.m. if you wanted to. And it also ruins fireworks for you for the rest of your life if you're
Right.
a child seeing
Every
one of
night.
the best firework displays in the world every night. But I grew up in a family that was like riddled with mental health issues. So multiple family members have suffered, but my mother was severely mentally ill. She suffered from schizoaffective disorder, so schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, a lot of different substance abuse disorders, come in and out of rehab. Ultimately, we weren't able to help her, and she spent about 15 years homeless before recently dying of a fentanyl overdose.
Good God. Oh, sorry to hear that.
I appreciate saying that. I'm a big believer that things don't happen to you; they happen for you.
Yeah.
So her life was like utterly tragic, and it was incredibly turbulent on our family.
Right.
And is a big reason of why I'm building Mindbloom and working in mental health and well-being.
Just pause there. It just seems to me it must have made you feel really desperate that you couldn't help your mom. You couldn't help her. Right. As a son, because there's this urge to really want to help your parents if they're struggling with something. I mean, for a lot of people, probably not anybody, but it's part of our filial duty. And if you absolutely can't help someone because mentally they're just not capable of receiving help, that's got to be a challenge.
I've had that frustration with a lot of members of my family. Part of my journey and why psychedelics have been so big for me is that I was much angrier than that. So I hated my mother.
Really?
She
Okay.
was, she's a little Jewish woman, but it was like violent, abusive, and just like very turbulent. And so I was raised by my adoptive stepfather, who's my hero, and like absolutely saved my life. And I had a very happy childhood full of sports and school and friendships and like a lot of love from him. But I had so much resentment towards her for so long for like ruining our family. And it wasn't until maybe I got a little further on my own, psychological or spiritual or ontological path, I started realizing like in retrospect, being angry at her was ridiculous because she was just very, 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 very sick and obviously had no ability to help herself, and we didn't have an ability to help her, and that's actually just like truly tragic.
That's interesting. So this adopted this father you had, what was the story with him, and how did he help shape you?
So I never met my biological father, sort of out of the picture at birth. And my adoptive stepfather, Greg, he met my mother about when I was 1 year old. And at the time he was like a party guy, very social, very gregarious. Didn't think he'd want to settle down. And what he would say is that in addition to falling in love with my mom, who had a lot of the cracks of mental health issues at the time, but had it more together, like really fell in love with me and decided he wanted to become a father. And he was a letter carrier, a mailman. Now he's a city bus driver.
That's cool.
In Southern California. So we're very much like a working class family. And he just made his number one non-negotiable top priority was to be the best parent possible to me and my half sister. That's his daughter. And so growing up, I was very into school and I'm a nerd, but we just had this like incredible relationship where he just like really showered me with like love and support, and a lot of his love, like social intelligence to draw upon. He's has magnetic in terms of how people are like drawn to him. And I think for me, it gave me like a really strong sense of like honor and duty, like seeing this man who is taking up the mantle of both parents.
Right.
Like he came to every one of my football practices. He'd cook dinner. He'd go to work. He would take care of me, my sister, and my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just like very inspirational for me. To see somebody take on that level of duty and provide that much like love and support, and to take on like that much of a burden to have to take care of a whole family in a really tough situation.
I think that's fascinating how the universe provided, where one member of the parental, side of the equation was incapable, provided a doubly capable person on the other side to balance things out. It often happens that way. It's fascinating to me.
I think I'm the luckiest person alive.
Yeah.
Right? Like how many alternate universes do I not have this
Right.
incredible, loving, supportive, stable father figure in my life, and it's just me and a very mentally ill parent.
Right. That's interesting. Okay, so what was your educational background like? Where did you go to school, and what did you study, and kind of like what was the formative academic kind of philosopher? How did that develop in you?
I think I was just very, very driven to get out of a turbulent home.
Right.
So I was just a relentless animal in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I was valedictorian in my high school.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, the highest GPA in Orange County history. I would sleep like 5 hours a night, wake up, take extra classes, create classes just to boost my GPA.
Good
I was
Lord.
like captain of the science Olympiad team, academic decathlon, played football competitively, and also played track and field.
What school did you go to up there?
I went to El Medina High School in Southern California.
Okay.
It's the 3,683rd ranked public school on U.S. News. I interviewed somebody recently who on his LinkedIn had like salutatorian at the number one ranked U.S. public school on U.S. News. I was like, what were we?
Yeah, that's fascinating. Well, it kind of reminds me of my high school, Barneveld, or upstate New York. We had about 200 people in my high school, and the biggest club was the Future Farmers of America. I was not a member.
No.
Great people, though.
Yeah, people need food. Food's
people
critical.
need food. I think 4 of us in my class went on to college, so I wonder where that would have ranked. I don't think it would have made the ranking. That's awesome. Okay, so you're a total nerd then. Wow. And you do college? Obviously, I imagine you did.
Yeah, I'm the first person in my family to go to college by a mile. I had a full scholarship to the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania.
Right.
Same scholarship Elon Musk got like years and years ago.
Right.
And so for me, like academics have always been a huge success. My challenge was I think I was very, very emotionally and maybe psychologically stunted.
Right.
I had like so much anger growing up. I'd get in fights. I'd have like some friends and I was very tribal, but I did not like people. They didn't like me. And I like viewed the world through this lens of people are bad, dumb, like the world is broken.
Right.
I need to like get mine, but I fundamentally had like a very negative relationship with it.
Right. That's interesting. That's not uncommon when you grow up with that turbulence and you're a highly intelligent person. Did you use any alcohol or drugs to try to balance out any of that emotional turmoil?
I drank a lot in college, but nothing that felt different than the average. Like I was in a fraternity, drank a few nights a week, quite heavily. Thought that was completely okay.
I did the same thing. It was pretty normal, right?
Oh, totally.
That's what we thought.
I actually wouldn't touch any illegal or illicit drugs because I grew up in the attic in my home for a long time. So the idea of taking, an illegal drug, as I was at the time ignorant to the reality of drug harm scales and what drugs are actually harmful to yourself and others. I would drink 4 or 5 nights a week, but everything else off limits.
I know. Isn't that crazy? Yeah. Alcohol, which is so destructive, is perfectly fine for you, but psilocybin, which is so healthy for you, is off limits. What goes?
It's just total status quo bias. We have this cognitive bias where whatever exists today, we think is like totally normal and how things are supposed to operate. But anything different seems radical. Until that thing becomes the norm, and then it seems completely normal, and then we forget that thing was weird and radical.
That's right.
Immediately. We get amnesia. It's wild.
Before we get into talking about plant medicine and Mindbloom, let's talk about your getting into entrepreneurship and And it sounds like you were kind of a social justice entrepreneur, right? Your first business was around voter access, and then you got into what's something to do with civil justice, right? Helping people deal with this justice system or get better service in the system. So let's talk about that and
Yeah,
the
I
impetus
would
there.
call totally. I would call it social justice. I would call it like I don't know, socially conscious.
Okay,
So like one of my viewpoints, which psychedelics and plant medicine have helped me realize, is that uh, we live in this like really special time where you have the opportunity to do something that can create like a global impact,
that's right.
like
Yeah,
global in terms of reach, like geographic global, and global in terms of like something that can like propel humanity like one step forward on the
that's right.
rung of development.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, I'm so lucky to be in the position of both because I've worked hard, but also because I've gotten lucky and have been given some, some opportunities to get to build technology that could potentially impact millions of people or push us a little bit forward. I think one of the areas of one of the things that the internet does for us is it enables us to democratize information and democratize access to things for people that
Right,
people previously didn't have access to.
right,
Every company I've done now has really been about like democratizing access. My first company is called Voters Friend that I co-founded, was a political tech startup helping to democratize access to election data for voters and democratize access to engage voters for local political candidates.
mm-hmm.
You
Okay,
could come on, enter your zip code, and for the first time ever, get like your full election ballot, like end to end, meet candidates. They could connect with you. And we signed up something like a third of every political candidate for every office in every geo we launched in. And we're one of the biggest platforms for local politics and sold that company to a company called democracy.com, which was trying to build like the big LinkedIn for politics for about a decade.
okay. Okay,
And then
interesting. Was that financially viable? I mean,
no,
was the business model there?
absolutely not.
Didn't
Absolutely
sound like
not.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I did this with this core hypothesis that if we empowered local politicians who are like better to get elected, then we could like ground up or from the ground floor up improve the entire political system.
Right.
Um, Sometimes like reality and your theory, when they collide, you see that there's a mismatch.
Right.
And what we discovered after I went out and talked to like thousands of political candidates was like not all, but most local political candidates were not going to rise up to become serious politicians. Most of
Right.
them just wanted like their face on yard signs and like be heard in like local city council.
Really? Okay.
Not all of them, right? There's some incredible people out there, but that was more of the norm. And so, in addition to seeing that there was no like functional business model because the candidates would churn in and out of the system, and
Right.
there's no way to like really capture a lot of revenue for the business.
Right.
Sort of disillusioned, and I decided to move on. My co-founder kept working on it because he was really passionate about it.
Right. Okay. So that led to your second venture. What was that called? Mighty?
It's called Mighty. It's one of the biggest providers of software and capital to the millions of people who get injured in like car accidents, construction accidents, medical accidents. Essentially, every year there's like $250 billion of lawsuit payouts for people who get hurt from like Geico, State Farm,
Right.
Allstate, all the people you see when you're watching football games. And the current system is just totally broken.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's super archaic, it's super inefficient. There are all these parties and it's a total mess. And because of that, at the end of the day, these people who get injured, they get like only a fraction of what they're owed. And it takes years for them to get it, which is wild because they're injured and they're out of work and like they really need it right now.
The rest goes to attorneys, or where does it go?
Attorneys, chiropractors, MRI centers, orthopedic surgeons,
Right.
finance companies who finance all those people.
Yeah.
It's very messy.
Oh, interesting.
So we built this platform that is helping those plaintiffs ultimately get better, fair, faster financial outcomes from the justice system, both with like software that everybody runs their businesses and systems on, and then capital that the company is helping to deploy into all of these people to make the system more efficient.
That's pretty interesting. And how's that going? Is that still in business?
Yeah, Absolutely. Yeah, it's a I would say like the number one provider in the space. And I absolutely love building this business. It was so fun. Like we're helping the 70% plus of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck and can't
Right.
come up with $500 in emergency to save their lives.
Right.
And I told you my story. Like that was us.
Right.
We never had a huge accident, but we were always like on that threshold. And I had neighbors who 1 year they were very poor and they had like 2 medical accidents and they were homeless after that. It was like 5 kids.
Wow. Yeah.
It's a lot of Americans. That's where they're at.
So walk me through how it works. Let's say I'm listening to this and I'm living paycheck to paycheck and I'm driving home and I'm enraptured with this podcast and I get in an accident. But I literally, the last thing I heard was Dylan say the term mighty. And so I Google mighty. What's next? What happens? How can it help me?
So the way it works, if you got rear-ended and both your legs are broken, you would then sign up an attorney who you're going to give away 1/3 of the case to on day one, even though they may or may not just file some paperwork. That attorney also, if it ends up going to court, usually won't even be the one who litigates your case. They're more like the advertising attorney who runs the bus stop ads and the billboards. And so they'll actually refer it out and carve that up to an attorney who actually like goes to court and litigates these things. Then your attorney might recommend that you go see like an injury doctor. So, in order for you to maximize the value of your case, go see doctors that I know who know how to deal with this. And so they'll introduce you to a chiropractor, maybe an orthopedic surgeon, imaging centers, like a whole slew of providers who will treat you for free today, but like mark up the value of that and it'll be paid out from your lawsuit.
Yeah.
Then your attorney might say, okay, if you need cash now, there are these finance companies who will give you an advance on the value of the claim that you're going to end up getting. And they obviously mark that up.
Right.
And so at the end, you've gone through this process that should have taken like a week or two, right? Like we have a robotic laboratory on Mars, but like if I rear end you, it's going to take us 2 or 3 years to figure out that I owe you an amount that like we all know from the fact that this is happening every single day and, in thousands of cases. And then at the end, you're also getting like a much smaller percentage of it because there have all been all of these people who have had to be involved all along the way.
Right.
So money actually supports like all of those stakeholders. So supports the lawyers, the doctors, the finance companies, so that they can all be significantly more efficient and like lower their cost of capital and lower like all of the losses that they have to ultimately like start creating like a way more efficient system that can get to the plaintiff and help people get like fairer and faster and better outcomes.
Okay. Sounds interesting. All right. So shifting focus, plant medicine. What was your first experience with that? And describe kind of what the effect was on you and some of the insights and shifts.
When I was in college, I started taking a course on positive psychology.
Mm-hmm.
As I started studying positive psychology, I had a little bit of like an epiphany moment, which was that I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
that I thought I had. Yeah, I thought I had it all figured out, right? Like I'm going to this great school. I did it. I hit all my goals. But I started seeing that there's evidence-based practices and ways to think about happiness, and that I was like way off track. All the things I was shooting for weren't going to make me happy, and this was like proven. And as I started really like investigating like my day-to-day and my relationships, I saw that I had like a lot of anger, strife, tension, like bridges I'd burned. And I was just like a pessimistic person.
Right.
As I had begun like thinking about this, maybe serendipitously, I had a friend who really, really recommended that I try Mdma.
Mm-hmm.
It was like 13 years ago. And as I mentioned earlier, at the time I was like very against any illicit or hard drugs because I grew up with an addict in my home. It's like horrifying to me. But I really trusted this person. I knew something had to change, and I gave it a go. And there's a reason you hear this frequently from people. It was just one of the most transformational things I've ever done in my entire life for myself.
Right.
It definitely didn't happen overnight, but it like rapidly catalyzed for me an evolution of transformation from a pessimist into an optimist. Like
from one experience or a series of experiences?
the one got me pretty close.
Right.
Um, like just to have this experience with MDMA of, it sounds like woo woo, but like of like my heart opening, of
Yeah.
like feeling like love and feeling deeply connected to people,
Yeah.
and really like feeling connected to strangers,
Yeah.
was so stunning that it like really pushed me like meaningfully further in terms of like being a
Right.
positive, maybe connected person.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. This is like embarrassing to say. It's like, I used to have like a heuristic in my mind. I would even tell people about this when I was a kid, where if I met somebody, I believed that I already didn't like you, and you would have to like prove to me why you're worthy of me liking you, right?
Right. That's
Like
fascinating.
that's disgusting.
Right. Well, it places a lot of stress on you because, you're that kind of barrier to cut people off and have them to basically earn your trust it's not uncommon, by the way, Dylan. I think that's, that comes from that staunch individualistic kind of ethic that is entrenched in our society, has been, for hundreds of years. But when you are so defended like that, it takes a lot of energy, and it's negative energy, to prop that edifice up. So you're just slowly draining your life force, I think,
Totally. And there's a
Wow.
positive feedback loop, right? Like the
Right.
negative energy begets a negative interaction with someone, which begets more negative
That's
energy,
right.
and
Yeah.
it just feeds on itself.
Feeds on itself. It's self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah. All these
Hmm.
people are dicks around me. Why?
Yeah.
Because I think they're dicks.
Yeah, totally.
Oh man. Yeah. And MDMA, it does has that effect, just completely like this just open orb all of a sudden that just is inclusive of everything, even
Hmm.
even plants and animals and Mother Earth. And it's a fascinating thing. What's the origin of MDMA? I mean, it does come from plant medicine, but it's still a chemical, right? It's manufactured. I mean, how do they make MDMA? Do you know?
So I believe it's like methylene deoxymethamphetamine is what MDMA stands for.
Right.
Um, uh, there there was this chemist named Alexander Shulgin, who is like largely considered the godfather of many psychedelics, maybe the godfather of psychedelics.
Got it.
Um, so he was this chemist who was responsible for synthesizing a lot of different psychedelic medicines, both phenethylamines, which are a certain class, like MDMA, and a
Hmm.
lot of those are can be derived from things like San Pedro,
Right.
to tryptamines. And so those are drugs that are more like psilocybin,
Right.
LSD, and things like that. So some of the drugs that he synthesized that are widely known are MDMA, 2CB, and a bunch of the 2C classes of drugs. This guy was such a legend. He would synthesize these molecules for the first time. He would test them on himself. So he would take like tiny, small amounts and then titrate up.
Right.
He'd record the doses and record the subjective effects. He would then have a close circle of sort of friends and family who would do similar and explore these molecules. And this was when it was all legal. He was like a researcher who was
Yeah.
doing this legally and above ground.
Oh, okay. Okay. I was going to ask that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when he like caught wind that a lot of these drugs are going to be scheduled, before it was illegal, he published a book, became two books, T-Call and P-Call. So phenethylamines I have known and loved, and tryptamines I have known and loved. And the book is like part love story about him and his wife and their background and their story.
Uh-huh.
And then the second half is like a recipe book, call it,
Yeah.
of how to synthesize these molecules, as well as like their subjective effects and reports on them, which is
Fascinating.
something you can buy today and is completely legal and help to get a lot of his research and democratize it and get it out to the public.
Right.
Hero stuff.
That's pretty wild. Okay. Most people, when they think of psychedelics, they think of, Tim Leary and LSD and the hippie movement and all that. And so I'm trying to figure out the timeline, but it was legal, right? And that's, and then it just, no one had thought in the government to make it illegal until that movement. And then they must have seen some sort of threat to social cohesion, in my opinion, that led them to put these things on Schedule C and make them illegal, right?
Yeah, there are a lot of theories. Like one predominant theory is people took psychedelics in the 70s. They didn't want to go to the Vietnam War,
Right.
and
Right.
and that was seen as this major risk to the war
Yeah.
effort, and of course the story we tell ourselves is to society. I maybe have like a Hanlon's razor viewpoint that's a little different, or a theory. So
Yeah.
Hanlon's razor is like, don't attribute to malice what could be attributed to just like incompetence.
Right.
Um,
I love that.
I think we just we split the atom. Like we discovered this like nuclear level technology for the mind, and that's scary as hell. And so like, if we've discovered how to split the atom, what might be the knee jerk reaction? Like, outlaw it. This is too dangerous.
Yeah. I tend to go on the other side, where I think people who are trying to organize and control the minds of a populace don't want everyone to be free. And psychedelics is a very freeing experience, right? It frees you from a lot of the mental constructs that keep you in a limited state or a contracted state of fear. And like for you, it took you out of fear-based negative thinking to one of very positive, open, growth-minded, inclusive. So it ascended you up the scale of consciousness very quickly. And so imagine, right, if this was a prescriptive thing for all of, like a population of humanity, suddenly we wouldn't need draconian controls of government, and we'd probably be letting people out of prisons, and there'd be huge businesses that would be out of business, and so there's a lot of money involved in maintaining the status quo. But that is kind of a pessimistic view, but it just seems to me, in my gut tells me that there's a little bit of a kernel of truth in that.
I think maybe my viewpoint is even more jaded, which is that's like assuming that the government is that coordinated. Totally. Like as I feel like everything's even more disconcertingly entropic. Like things are happening. A bunch of people have incentives. There's like indebted growth obligations where it makes everything keep getting bigger and bigger. But there's no like massive underlying coordinated strategy that would drive that.
Yeah, you're probably right. Or it could be a combination of both. There might be some interests that push in one direction and others that push in the other direction, and everything just kind of balances out where it's supposed to at a stage of development for a culture. You
mentioned the stages of development. Is this just like a framework you have sort of in your own head, or is there like a stage of development framework that you think about, or like you've read about?
I've studied for many, many years Eastern philosophy and Western transpersonal psychology, and our own program at Untitled Mind, we leverage Wilber's integral theory and spiral dynamics and Lovinger's work, and so we're very familiar. We have our own framework we call the 5 plateaus for developmental psychology, and so I don't take it as a matter of opinion, but as a matter of fact that human beings grow through different stages of development that become increasingly less egoic and more open and inclusive, to include ultimately integration or union, which is care and concern for all sentient beings, which would be equated to more like enlightenment experience from the East. So that's the framework that I work on, and I believe the psychedelics play an important catalytic role in especially from an emotional standpoint. So here's the thing: like, you can use meditation and a lot of different techniques, a lot of which came from yoga and Eastern practices, to achieve temporary states like flow states and spiritual experience states. But generally speaking, it's emotional development and the biases that, to use a term used earlier, from our family of origin and the cultures and the languages that we grow up with, that kind of lock us in a particular stage of development. And so either it takes a crisis, a life crisis, or a health crisis, or some experience that really shatters that paradigm and allows us to really transcend and include those former experiences to grow, right? And research shows that most people don't necessarily grow on their own. They require some sort of nudge like that, and psychedelics be one of those powerful nudges to get them to start to ascend up that scale of consciousness. And similar to a comment you made earlier about technology democratizing access to information, I believe that for the first time in our known human history, not to say there weren't other possible periods that have been wiped, from the books, where we can scale consciousness globally, right? And that's our mission at Unbeatable Mind, is to scale consciousness so that we have hundreds of millions and then billions of people thinking and acting at that unity level of consciousness. And that's when things will change.
I'm excited to ask you this. I started Mindbloom with this big mission, which sounds like it's quite shared, to transform lives, to transform the world.
Yeah,
So
I share
to
that.
help people, totally help people become better, healthier, more courageous,
Right.
more enlightened versions of themselves for them, but also for what they would then do for their friends, family, community, and
That's
the
right.
world.
It's a team. It's not just about, we're not a bunch of yogis in a cave, doing this for our own enlightenment. It's all about the team and the global community and the earth.
I call that the pursuit of neo enlightenment. Like I don't want to retract from society. I want to be the best version of myself. Exactly.
That's great. Neo enlightenment. Oh, I'm going to adopt that. Thank you.
So I also started coming out of these two sub goals. One was to build an organization where I built like really meaningful, lifelong relationships with people. Like when I looked at my career, all the failures or the things that I thought I left really on the table were all like relationship based, not even like success of the organization or my career based. The second it was to create a company where we weren't just transforming the lives of our clients, but to create a transformational, like more conscious company culture where people would say, like, because I worked at Mindbloom, I didn't just, have a professional transformation, but I grew immensely, personally, psychologically, spiritually,
we call
ontologically.
that a deliberately developmental organization, or a DDO. And that's one of the things that we do with organizations, is try to implant that culture where the organization is about your growth and transformation, as well as the work that you're doing in society. Very cool. So you guys you're doing it.
Well, I'm really excited to talk to you about this. So I read maybe a couple of years ago, Reinventing Organizations.
That's a great book. Yeah. Integral theorist. I forget his name, starts with an F. Anyways.
It's like Frederick Laloux.
He's a French. Laloux. Yeah, Laloux. Yeah. That's right. Not an F, an L. I was close.
So very challenging, right? Like how do you help build this, like, I don't know, decentralized or it's very
self-managing organization? I tried and completely failed. You have to have everyone kind of ready for that. It's difficult.
So I'd love to chat with you about it. We do a few things that are really radical. So like we don't believe in one-on-ones. We do everything as a team. Right. So people like bring in their like, what their commitments were over the past 2 weeks. Did they hit them? Yes, no. If no, then why? What habit are they going to change to hit them in the future? Like what's going well, not against their, their objectives and their KPIs, key performance indicators. What are their next commitments? And then like the next week, everyone gives feedback in writing. Like what do I appreciate? And I wish, what's constructive, that is again, across the team, not just like up, down, but in writing that the whole company can see. Nice. So if you join Mindbloom, you can see every piece of quite critical feedback that I've received as CEO over the past few years from all the members of my leadership team. And we do, I think, a bunch of other things that are pushing towards sort of a more, I love that word, self-managing organization. We do things like decision docs where people are just responsible for making their own decisions as long as they have some rigor behind them. And we don't believe in consensus decision making. We believe in like extreme levels of personal accountability and responsibility. What have you seen work? Like how might I think about creating a more conscious, transcendent, evolved organization?
Well, those are awesome, by the way. I think those are great for great decision models and ways of organizing productive work, right? Because you're open and inclusive as opposed to siloing or point to point. So that's awesome. Our work, really. I was so inspired by Wilber's, and I've met Ken a few times, but it's his integral model. And so we look at through the lens of the 4 quadrants, and we ask, what can we do in these 4 quadrants to really bring people along or expand them and to connect them more? And so the first quadrant is the quadrant of self-concept. And so we look at within the context of the organization, for the average company, you just go to work and then you can't wait to leave, right? and you've got your objectives and you're working, but it's that. So what we say is, no, you go to work, and your work is every bit as important as your home space is, right? So there's complete alignment between who you are at work and who you are at home, or else you're at the wrong place. Right. And so to really clarify why you do what you things and make sure that your work is completely in alignment with who you know that you are. Right. And so you might end up aligning with an organization whose purpose aligns with yours, or you might align your purpose with an organization if you're passionate about it, but you're very clear about who you are and why you're at that place. And so you bring 100% of yourself to work. So that's one thing. And then second thing we do there is like, we encourage, well, we when we're working with clients, we require this, that we do our practices together at work, right? So you might have your own morning ritual where you're going to do your meditation and your whatever it is, your journaling and your reflection. And what we do is we start every single meeting with a box breathing practice, and we practice active listening, and we teach it, and we practice active listening, which is kind of more of a mindful listening, be responsible, radically responsible for how your words land, right? As well as, what you're saying and why you're saying them. And so we have certain tools around communication, which really are around listening and being very, very thoughtful with the formation of the words that you're going to use, right? Which is a very, very powerful practice, as you can imagine. So the organization itself, the workspace and the work environment then becomes one where we're practicing pausing and being non-reactive through our breath work. We practice positive talk as a team. We don't allow negative language. We call that feeding the courage wolf. Anyone who starts to use negative language or starts to be pessimistic about a project or a person, we cut it off right there at the head, cut the snake off at the head, and we get back into positive self-talk, positive dialogue. A third thing
does cutting snake heads off not count as negative language?
That was just that's kind of a meditation. It's a meditation concept that actually comes from Tibetan Buddhism. Like, it's like when you grab a thought at the head, not the tail. After you run with it, that's where that came from. And then visualization, right? So this is great for you as a CEO. It's like you've got a vision for Mindbloom, but does your team have the same vision? And do you practice that vision, right, through guided visualizations? So that's really important too, right? Because like I learned this in Navy SEAL training. If we all had a different mental concept and image of what the mission looked like and what success looked like, we'd have 16 guys, with 16 different ideas of success. And so when we briefed a mission, we visualized it the same way. And we used imagery and the language that we use, and we would use video and pictures, and so everyone was seeing the same outcome. So that's another way to develop a DDO. And there's others. So then we would do this in each of those 4 quadrants. So, I covered kind of what I just talked about covers a couple of the quadrants, because the I and the we really is about communication, engagement, pausing and breathing and being present with your teammates instead of being that typical guy, do. And so we really reinforce this idea of kind of the yin and the yang. There's time to do and there's time to pause. So we operate in a 2-week sprint, and then we pause, and then we do a 2-week sprint, and then we pause. So there's this real balancing effect that's more natural. They're just some of the things that we do. I think you're on a great track, though. It's exciting. I'm anxious to see how it turns out. How old is Mindbloom now?
I started the company in late 2018.
Okay.
But we didn't really launch until we launched in September of 2019. It probably took us about 6 months.
Yeah.
So it's still very early,
still young. Pretty early, like 2 years.
Yeah. it's been pretty stunning. We're by far the largest provider of clinical psychedelic therapy in the country by revenue, patients. Our clinical outcomes are next level. We're about to publish what's going to be the largest ever clinical study in psychedelic medicine history of the last 60 years.
Oh, good
from a number of participant standpoint. Demonstrating the 10x better clinical outcomes that our sort of platform that's at-home ketamine therapy with coaching and content.
Right. Are you providing the therapist the product as well, or how does it work? Like, tell me your business model. How does it work?
Yeah. So Mindbloom is a platform where affiliated psychiatric clinicians are helping people with anxiety and depression by prescribing them at home.
They have to be PhD psychiatric. They can't be like a therapist.
So the prescribers have to be doctors. So
Got it.
they're all psychiatric providers. They're
Right.
specifically mental health care professionals. So
Okay.
psychiatrists and psychiatric nurse practitioners.
Got it.
Then we also have a network of coaches that we call their guides, who are specialized mental health care coaches and counselors who are specifically trained in how to help people prepare, go through, and integrate ketamine and psychedelic therapy experiences to get the most out of them.
And where do they get trained and certified?
Right now they're trained all over. I mean, we have a training program. One of the things we're excited about is like doing a little bit more of like a formal certification program. So we train them when they come on. Some have gone through different training programs, and right now, we have a couple hundred providers that work with us. We're working to sort of build out like what the best world-class sort of remote coaching program for psychedelic therapy looks like. And right now they're doing everything from like individual Zoom sessions.
Right.
They do group integration sessions where people come on and share about their experiences, similar to people who've done ayahuasca. Might sound familiar.
Yeah.
And then also messaging through the platform to help people help them send their intentions, based on their intentions, help guide them on maybe guided visual imagery or different music or meditations they should use for the session, help them journal after the session and give them different integration practices and kind of keep them accountable to them between each session.
God, that's fantastic. I got to tell you, my wife is actually looking at a certification program at CIAS, California Institute of Integral Studies. And she's taken a course in the use of EMDR with psychedelics. And what a powerful combination that is right there. If you're familiar with eye motion dissociation reprocessing, that's been valuable for me. Actually, I've used EMDR quite a bit to overcome some of my trauma, childhood trauma, and it's very effective as well. And so psychedelics as well. You put those two together. This is really powerful. I'm excited for you and for everyone to learn about this. So you've already served over 100,000. I saw. Maybe that was even an old stat.
Yeah, we're doing well over 100,000 psychedelic therapy sessions a year right now through the platform.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It seems like it's still pretty fringe. I mean, that's a surprising number. I mean, is this more prevalent than maybe I'm aware already?
It's a good question. So the way I think about it is mental health care is like widely considered number one public health crisis, COVID notwithstanding, and COVID's made it way worse, right?
COVID's made it way worse.
Depression, number one cause of disability worldwide. Suicide, second leading cause of death for people 18 to 35, fourth leading cause of death for people 35 to 55. Overdose deaths have gone up 5x in the past 20 years. It's wild. And when you look at why does this problem exist, you can kind of look at it two ways. There's people who are getting severe mental health issues. So what are the causes of those? And then those people are not getting their issues resolved. So there's a treatment issue. When you dig into the clinical research around existing treatment options, so that's like SSRIs, like Lexapro or Prozac, which 40 million Americans are prescribed, or even talk therapy, what you see is that they're just not good enough.
Obviously they don't work.
SSRIs only work 40 to 47% of the time. In terms of having a clinically significant response from a given SSRI. Over 50% of people have severe side effects, weight gain, sexual dysfunction, insomnia. They take 6 to 8 weeks to work. So you're just waiting, and then they might not work and you might have side effects. And a lot of people who might need help don't take them because they don't want to get hooked on a daily medication that they take every day. So ketamine therapy and our ketamine therapy program that's at home gets people a clinically significant result twice as frequently as that, over 80% of the time. It works right away. Less than 5% of our clients have side effects. They're usually pretty light, like nausea. And you can take it periodically versus as needed. And it's a pretty pleasant experience most of the time.
Are you using inhaled ketamine or injected?
It's actually sublingual. So these little flavored tablets that people put under their tongue, their sublingual membrane, or in their cheeks, their buccal membrane, and it absorbs directly into the bloodstream. So they'll sit with it for about 7 minutes while they're listening to guided meditations and music. There's a chime, they spit it out. Session's about an hour.
Okay. And the effect lasts for that long?
It's about an hour on average. Sometimes it's as low as like 35 to 45 minutes. Sometimes it can
Right.
last like an hour and a half or longer.
Well, that's fascinating. And that's the only thing you're working with, ketamine? You're not working with psilocybin?
Ketamine is the only prescribable
That's right.
psychedelic
It's the only
medicine today.
legal one, right, at this point. That's right. I forgot about that.
Yep. Psilocybin is very exciting. So Oregon recently passed like a law or statute
Right.
that essentially created a 2-year period for them to figure out a clinical construct to prescribe and administer therapeutic medical psilocybin. MDMA is in like the last leg of FDA approval.
Is it?
So MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, they've been, working on like psychedelic advocacy, psychedelic legalization, medicalization for over 50 years. And we are like 1 year away from MDMA assisted therapy being FDA approved.
Oh, wow. There's a lot of money
like
flowing into this industry as well. I know like famous venture capitalists like Peter Thiel are investing in psilocybin use as a pharmacological kind of intervention.
Yeah, we're backed by a bunch of tier 1 VCs. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I have a foundation called the Courage Foundation. We work with vets, and I haven't gone there yet, but I think I'm going to, especially after this conversation, I'm going to start investigating. And maybe there's a partnership here or a way I'll just funnel them over to Mindbloom, because there's so many vets who have been healed with psychedelics, but there's so many that don't know anything about it, right? Most don't, right? So a handful have been healed, like hundreds, and thousands are suffering, right, from post-traumatic stress. So I'm going to be doing a live, I'd love for you to join me, or, if you're available, I'm going to be doing a live Q&A style webinar with this guy named Dr. Martin Poblano, who's been doing this for like 15 years. And he does it in Mexico, obviously, because it's illegal here. And he takes veterans through an ibogaine and then a 5-LEO DMT process. And it has an enormous success rate. Can you imagine that? It's like
just the light stuff, right?
1-2 punch light stuff, exactly. Yeah. And with all the right preparation and a very curated environment with doctors and therapists, and it's extraordinary, because I've talked to some SEALs who've gone through it, and these guys were like desperate, just drinking every day, and literally about ready to off themselves, and they come out of it with a sparkle in their eye, literally a few weeks later after integration, they're like, I'm back, baby. In fact, a really funny story. This one SEAL, SEALs are just crazy as can be, as you can imagine. This one SEAL literally comes out of his comes out of his 5-LEO DMT, which is the desert frog. For anyone who doesn't know, it's like 15 minutes of just pure God experience. He literally comes out of it. His eyes are like, whoa, and he does a backflip, and he goes, baby, I'm back.
That's very, very different reaction than my 5-MeO DMT experiences.
No, I had one of those experiences. It was probably more like you, where I was just like, what in the fuck? I was not ready for it. That was about 10 years ago.
You can't be ready for it. That's impossible.
It's impossible to be ready for that.
Impossible to be ready for it. We have a lot of clinicians who are vets, and a lot of our clients are vets. We would love to. We have different programs like specifically for vets, and are like continually partnering with more and more veteran organizations to
we'll
help our service members.
Yeah, they need it. Everybody does, right? It's not, trauma doesn't discriminate, but vets have a particular nasty version of it because of what they face in combat and depravity of combat. Yeah, so we'll reach out and connect on that. This is fascinating. So you're just at the beginning of this journey with Mindbloom. What's the what are the business goals for you? You're going to go public? You're going to try to take this thing to a certain size, or what do you think?
Yeah.
Is it more about the social impact you can make?
Well, they're definitely not mutually exclusive. So we're the number one provider of consumer psychedelic therapy, but it's like day one.
Yeah.
Look, we just talked about how big the problem is and how deficient existing treatment options are. So if you think that like a 10x better solution to our biggest problems will be the future, then it's clear as day to me that the future is going to be ketamine and then other medicines and therapies, and then eventually other neurotechnologies that we develop in the future
Right.
will overtake all these existing treatment options as like the predominant treatment. So the goal is to, in the short term, help make ketamine therapy a mainstream treatment, potentially the frontline treatment over SSRIs, by radically increasing access to treatment and
Right.
by creating a product that's getting people better outcomes and better experiences.
Right.
So that means like we need to make it approachable for people so that people like consider it, because it's still weird and stigmatized and scary as hell.
Right.
We need to make it affordable for people so that they can actually afford treatment and actually available to people. One of the things I think a lot about is just like my family growing up. Like if ketamine therapy was around 20 years ago, like would we have tried it for my mother?
Right.
Like one, like it would have been, we're going to like treat my mother's drug addiction with another drug. Like that's confusing. So that would have taken a lot of education and a lot of, getting comfortable and seeing other people do it probably. Like two, single working class father. Like when I started Mindbloom 2 or 3 years ago, it was like $800 to $1,000 a session at like the average ketamine clinic. And so like that was off the table for us.
Right.
And then three, getting to a clinic or having someone take you and sit with you for hours, take you back, like really tough for let's say like a single mother of like 4.
Right.
So even with our family, like single working father, like who's going to take her? Who's going to deal with this?
Right.
Who's going to watch the kids when when babysitters are hard? So that's one of the reasons that we're using telemedicine to get access for this to people who don't have access because they maybe they live in a rural environment.
Reduced or eliminated almost all the barriers.
And one by one, we're trying.
Yeah.
But I think to our discussion earlier, like the goal is to help make a dent in global human suffering, and also help people like unlock their potential so that they're better people for themselves, but also like better people for the world.
Yeah.
This opportunity to like increase human capital by helping to transform consciousness.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate what you're doing, and I appreciate your vision and mission. And I stand by to support you any way I can because I share it in my own way. Right. I'm focused on getting people to take a responsibility for their own integrated training, their own consciousness development. And I think certainly psychedelic therapy or even just an experience, even if you think you're healthy, can be a catalyst, right, for further growth. And it should be curated instead of with a bunch of friends, right? In my opinion, anyway. So we'll share that journey, and I'd love to connect with you on the veteran issue. So we'll follow up on that, and if there's anything I can do to support your cause personally or through Mindbloom, then please don't hesitate to ask.
Thanks. I love that you keep using the word radical responsibility. Have you read the 15 Commitments to Conscious Leadership?
I have not. Sounds like I should. Yeah.
It's exceptional. It's one of the few books that we give every new Bloomineer, every new Mindbloom employee when they start. And that's, and that's the, Bloomineers, we all work in the Mindbloomiverse. You're not building a company culture unless you're creating your own language.
I love it.
And I believe the first commitment is like taking 100% responsibility.
Yeah.
So it's something that we talk about a lot. And I get asked all the time, like, what is the best mental health and well-being practice or treatment? And my response is like deciding that you're going to take 100% responsibility for your own mental health and well-being as a 100% non-negotiable top priority.
Yeah.
Right.
I love it.
If you're like, what's the most important thing for your physical health? It's like deciding that you're going to take control of your physical health, not your doctors, not a trainer.
No, it's like you take care of your fitness, you take care of your nutrition, you take care of your sleep, you take care of your supplementation. If you have an injury, maybe you need to consult an expert, but it's still up to you to heal it. I 100% agree with that. That's awesome. Who wrote that, by the way? 15. What is it?
The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership.
Okay.
It's Jim Detmer and Diana Chapman, I think is their name.
Yeah. I've heard of Diana. I'll have it from Amazon probably tomorrow.
It's exceptional. Highly recommend.
All right, Dylan. All right, buddy. Really great to talk to you. And I look forward to staying connected in the future.
Likewise, Mark. This was a blast. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, likewise. Appreciate your time today. All right. Hoo-yah.